There is something deeply unsettling hearing a child say something no child should ever have to say. But recently, that's exactly what happened. 12-year-old Eve Franke looked directly at lawmakers and said something that honestly took my breath away. She said, "As you may know, my name is Eve. I'm doing this again because the people making laws are being stupid again." That was directly from Eve Franke this week. And if that sentence alone doesn't make you pause, what she said next probably will. She said she remembers police officers and child welfare workers knocking on the door of the house where she was being abused for months, but they couldn't come in. She said, "I remember that for months, police officers and DCFS knocked on our door, but they were never able to come in. If they had, I would have been saved from starvation, isolation, and just abuse in general." Just let that sink in for a moment. Help was outside the door, but the law couldn't get them inside. We're talking about a major update with the Franke family. And later in this episode, we're going to hear the full statements from Eve and her now 15-year-old brother, Russell, including a moment that is honestly one of the most chilling things I've heard from a child. Because at just 12 years old, Eve describes what she lived through and even calls her own mother a psychopath. It's something we almost never hear in cases like this, the voices of the victims themselves. Russell and Eve Franke, they are children, and they are also abuse survivors. And now both of them are speaking publicly about what happened to them and about the law they believe could have saved them. And honestly, their statements are some of the most powerful things I have heard in a long time. My name is Lauren Matthias, and this is Hidden True Crime. Most of you watching undoubtedly know the Franke's story, but to understand why this legislation matters so much to this family, I want to touch on what happened just for a moment. The Franke family became famous on YouTube through their channel 8 Passengers. The channel showed the daily lives of Ruby Franke, her husband Kevin Franke, and their 6 children. For years, the channel portrayed a pretty typical large family life: school mornings, family dinners, parenting struggles, all the things that happen in normal families, right? And at its peak, the channel had more than 2 million subscribers. Millions of people watched these kids grow up online. But over time, viewers also began noticing that Ruby's parenting style often leaned towards authoritarian with extreme discipline and obedience.
My bedroom was taken away for 7 months, and then you give it back like a couple weeks ago.
I don't think our viewers know that.
You've been sleeping on a beanbag.
I've been sleeping on a beanbag since October, and they gave my room back like 2 weeks ago.
If you cut one more thing in my house,
We're chopping its head off.
I'm going to take the scissors, look at me, and I'm going to cut its head off.
Grandma will be so mad.
So what are you going to do?
Are you gonna cut anything else? No.
You promise? Look at Mama. I just got a text message from Eve's teacher, and she said that Eve did not pack a lunch today, and can I bring a lunch over to the school? This happens quite often when you're raising children, because I know that her teacher is uncomfortable with her being hungry and not having a lunch. And it would ease her discomfort if I came to the school with a lunch. But I responded and just said, Eve is responsible for making her lunches in the morning, and she actually told me she did pack a lunch. So the natural outcome is she's just going to need to be hungry. And hopefully nobody gives her food and nobody steps in and gives her a lunch.
There were so many moments that caused backlash online, and eventually the channel stopped altogether. It just stopped uploading. But by that time, something much darker was happening behind the scenes. And that was the influence of licensed therapist Jodi Hildebrandt. And as the backlash online was increasing, Ruby and Kevin were becoming deeply involved with Jodi and her alleged therapeutic program that she called Connections. Yes, Connections with an X. And Connections focused heavily on morality, personal accountability, and strict behavioral control and obedience, all under the guise of self-help. And over time, Ruby became completely immersed in that program. While Jodi would tell Kevin to work on himself in order to save his marriage and family, she would create distance and isolate the married couple. Ruby, on the other hand, was cast as Jodi's star patient and began appearing in videos and podcasts with Jodi. Ruby became a mental fitness coach for Connections, and the pair would talk about parenting, discipline, and something they called living in truth. But gradually, Jodi's influence became increasingly controlling, and the relationship Jodi and Ruby shared became more disturbing. Ruby distanced herself from relatives. Kevin was kicked out of their Utah home, and then the oldest son, Chad, and then the oldest daughter, Sherry, also kicked out, until the 4 younger remaining children were left without a safety net at all. And eventually, the 2 youngest, most vulnerable children, Russell and Eve, were moved into Jodi's desert dwelling in southern Utah, Ivins to be exact. The $5 million house, situated among cacti and red rock, it was isolated. And what investigators later discovered happening inside that house was nothing less than horrific, a true house of horrors. Everything came crashing down on August 30th, 2023. That was the day a starving, injured little boy became a hero. He showed up at a neighbor's house asking for help.
Yes.
Hi, I was just wondering if you could do 2 favors.
Well, what are they?
Taking me to the nearest police station. Well, actually, just one's fine.
What's going on, son? Have a seat there.
It's personal business.
Have a seat.
That child was Russell Franke. He was just 12 years old, and his full name is now being used as he speaks his truth to lawmakers. Russell courageously found a moment, and it was a moment that changed everything. While he knew if he got caught, the punishment could end in unfathomable punishment, in death if he got caught. Yes, he took the risk, knowing it was his one chance, and he escaped Jodi's home despite his life, his very life, being at risk. He found someone home at a neighboring house and asked for help. He was extremely thin. He had open wounds to the bone. Duct tape had been used on parts of his body, and it was clear horrific things had been done to this little boy. The neighbor immediately called 911 and broke down on the call while explaining Russell's state.
His ankles are taped up, and he won't tell us why.
Okay.
But he has duct taped around each ankle. Yeah, there's sores around them. I think there's a good chance he's been...
He also said...
Oh, and he has them around his ankles. I mean, his wrists as well. Okay, this boy has been... He needs... This kid has obviously been... I think he's been detained. He's obviously covered in wounds.
When officers arrived, Russell told them his sister was still inside Jodi's home, the House of Horrors. Police arrived at the house and found Eve Franke inside a dark closet sitting on the floor in silence.
We helped your brother, and we got him some help too. And that's what we want to do for you. If we want to get you some help too. We are safe. We will not hurt you, and we won't do anything to hurt you.
Eve, too, was severely malnourished, clearly too traumatized to even speak or trust the adults trying to help her. It took hours to convince her to even allow them to help, but both children were taken to the hospital. Ruby Franke and Jodi Hildebrandt were arrested that very same day. Eventually, they both pleaded guilty to multiple counts of aggravated child abuse and were sentenced to prison in February 2024. This case absolutely shocked the country and the world. But as we now know, there were warning signs long before Russell escaped, and that's where this new fight begins. Kevin Franke and the oldest Franke child, Sherry, have been very open about the warning signs that existed before the arrests. Ruby pulled the children out of their private school and said she was going to homeschool them. But that decision had a huge consequence. Teachers and school staff were no longer seeing the kids regularly. And then the children became increasingly isolated. Neighbors rarely saw them, friends didn't see them, and eventually they were held captive in Jodi Hildebrandt's fortress. Yes, family members were worried. Their big sister Sherry even tried to report her concerns to police and contacted Utah's Division of Child and Family Services herself.
Hi, my name is Sherry Franke. My 4 younger siblings are living in Springville, and my neighbors have been telling me that they have been left home alone for about 4 or 5 days.
But there were major obstacles. Ruby and Jodi refused to cooperate. They ignored phone calls. They refused to answer the door. And under current Utah law, that can shut down an investigation. Because unless authorities already have strong evidence of abuse, they cannot force entry into a home just to check on a child. Kevin and Sherry say that this legal gap allowed the abuse to continue for months. And because of that experience, Kevin and Sherry began advocating for changes to Utah's child welfare laws. Specifically, they began supporting Senate Bill 124. The bill would allow investigators to ask a juvenile court judge for an investigative warrant, and that warrant would allow authorities to physically check on a child when credible safety concerns exist and parents refuse to cooperate. Supporters say it wouldn't automatically remove children from homes. What it would do is simply allow investigators to confirm that the child is safe. That's it. Kevin says similar laws already exist in most states, just not Utah. But Utah doesn't have that legal tool. And that gap, he says, is exactly what allowed Ruby and Jodi to hide the children. The bill is known as the Gavin Peterson bill. It was named after a young boy named Gavin Peterson, a 12-year-old boy from Utah who died after severe abuse at the hands of family members. Investigators later discovered there were warning signs in his case too. Authorities had concerns about his welfare, but investigators didn't physically see him for nearly a year. And by the time the truth came out, it was too late. Supporters of the bill say Gavin's case exposed this same legal gap. If authorities can't physically check on a child when parents refuse to cooperate, abuse can remain hidden for months or longer, for years even. And that is why lawmakers propose SB 124. The idea was to create a middle ground, not immediate removal, not forced arrests, just the ability to verify that a child is safe. That's it. The bill eventually passed the Utah Senate, but when it reached the House of Representatives, it failed. The vote was 30-43. Some lawmakers said they were concerned about government overreach or parental rights. Others argued the existing laws were already enough. But the Franke family, they strongly disagree. And that vote is what prompted Russell and Eve to use their voices and speak out. Yes, the voices of victims, the voices of survivors, and now the voices of advocates. Russell released a statement about the failed bill, and I want to read his words exactly as he wrote them. He said, quote, "I don't know why this bill didn't get passed. I find it shocking that legislatures would find it better for a kid in an abusive situation to have to fend for themselves and try to escape. This is exactly what I had to do. I realized that I had to get out of my abusive situation with my mom. I wish I didn't need to put my life on the line in order to accomplish this. It would have saved a lot of physical and mental pain for me and my sister. And sure, this bill wasn't even an idea at the time of this event, but for kids in the future, this bill could save them if it got passed." End quote. Did you hear that, by the way? He admits his life was at risk. He put his life on the line in order to escape and save his little sister and himself. That statement feels incredibly powerful because Russell isn't speaking theoretically. He is describing exactly what happened to him. He had to escape. He had to risk his life just to get someone to listen. And then Eve, his little sister, released her statement. And honestly, it is one of the most direct statements I have ever heard from a 12-year-old. She said, quote, "As you may know, my name is Eve. I'm doing this again because the people making laws are being stupid again." She continues, "Kids are dying and being traumatized left and right because, well, I don't know why. And that's the problem. I see no reason with real logic behind it as to why this law shouldn't be in place." And then she said something heartbreaking. "I remember that for months, police officers and DCFS knocked on our door, but they were never able to come in. If they had, I would have been saved from starvation, isolation, and just child abuse in general." I'm going to stop here for a second. Imagine hearing that as a lawmaker. The help was outside the door, but the law couldn't get them inside. Eve continued, "The only reason I survived at all was because my brother was brave enough to take a risk. But clearly, the government doesn't have the bravery of a 12-year-old child. They can't even take a risk to protect people." And then she said something chilling. Think about that. A week from when me and my brother were rescued, we were going to move to a farm miles away from any civilization, she explains. And then she asked a question. Quote, "What do you think will happen if you put two psychopaths and two already abused kids together in an isolated farm?" And then she answers the question, the chilling question she just asked. "Yeah, I probably would have died, but I was lucky. But not everyone is lucky. So many kids aren't lucky, but with this law, they at least have a chance." And then she ended her statement with this. "Also, again, this was my idea," referencing this statement. "I actually support this law, and I was not told to say any of this. Please, I cannot handle another case, so pass this law," end quote. That last sentence says everything. A 12-year-old asking lawmakers to prevent another case like hers. Kevin Franke has also spoken publicly about the vote. He said he felt emotional and grateful for Russell's courage, but he is also furious. He said it made him white-hot angry that a starving 12-year-old boy had to save himself and his sister. Kevin explained that the current system operates at two extremes. Authorities can knock on a door, or authorities can break it down once they already have proof of abuse. But that space between those two situations, those two extreme situations, is enormous. And the gap is where children can fall through the cracks. Sherry Franke has also spoken out. She reminded people that she tried to report concerns long before the arrests. She said, "I called the police a year before my mother's arrest. I called DCFS. The police did all the right things. DCFS did the right things. But because I had no physical evidence, despite knowledge of Jodi and Ruby's personalities and pasts, my siblings could not be saved before permanent damage had been done." And then she asked a question encouraging all of us to stop and listen. Why must we wait until children die until we call attention to abuse? End quote. Hearing from Russell and Eve changes the way people can see this case, because now the victims themselves are telling us what went wrong. Russell had to escape a house to survive. He knows he was risking his life to do so. Eve is asking lawmakers to change the system so other kids won't have to do the same thing. She realizes she was in a house with two psychopaths, one being her own mother. She too realizes death was in her future had Russell not escaped. She confirms the woman's plans to move them to a farm, assumably in Arizona, where Ruby and Jodi had looked at property, and that there, Eve, according to Eve, would have most likely died. Whether people agree with the bill or not, one thing should be obvious and something we all agree with. No child should ever have to rescue themselves. No child should be put in a place where they are weighing the risk between escaping or facing their own death. And no child should have to beg adults to fix the system after the fact. And perhaps that one thing that we all agree on, then for Eve and Russell's sake, we should at least learn about the bill, understand the bill, look into the bill and what it means. See if it's working in other states. Try to find out about what loopholes are active in Utah, making it easier for abusers. Or check out the loopholes in the states you live. Because as of right now, the bill has failed. But advocates say the fight is not over. Kevin Franke says he and others will continue pushing for changes to Utah's child welfare laws. And now 2 of the children who survived the abuse are part of that conversation, part of that fight, which may be the most powerful voices of all. Because when the people who live through something like this speak, it should make all of us listen. Even Russell, I am listening. I will learn about the failed bill, and I'll continue bringing what I learn here at Hidden True Crime, because crime isn't just about the story, and justice isn't just about throwing the criminal behind bars. Sometimes justice is about change. It's about acknowledging where laws and society fail the victims and where we can make changes or help other children, where we can make a difference to stop another psychopath and to stop another Eve and Russell Franke from suffering the way they did.